Welcome to How to Homeschool Radio, the show where we help new and veteran homeschoolers create a successful homeschool that works for their families. Whether you're thinking about homeschooling, just started homeschooling, or have been homeschooling for years, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Judy Sardin, homeschooling coach, homeschooling mom of two, and author of Sardin's Practical Guide, How to Start Homeschooling. Are you ready? Let's get to it. Good morning, and this is Judy Sardin, and I'm here with Jan Bedell, who is going to talk to us about how to help kids acquire math facts. She's going to talk to us about her rapid recall system. And Jan is a Neuro Developmentalist, and she specializes in helping children's brains work better. So I'm not the scientist, and that's about as much as I can say about what you do, Jan. So can you tell us more about what it is you do before we jump into the rapid recall system?
I just want to encourage everyone to watch the other one that we're going to do is on executive functioning. And there's some other answers there too, as far as how the brain functions well and storing information in the right place so that it can come out. So that has something to do with it too. Mm-hmm. But the technique of getting it in is what we're going to talk about here. Okay. That will make a difference.
Awesome.
So we're going to take the flashcard idea, which is what we've seen before, but you see ours are a lot different. They have the answer on there. And so we're going to take 5 facts, and this is just an example. We're going to have a reciprocal, a couple of reciprocals, and maybe a double, but we're not going to go in families. This is another place where we break from tradition is, you learn your 2s, and then you learn your 3s, and then you learn your 4s. And what our philosophy is when you see this, when you're adding a multi-digit problem, you've got to have that particular piece of information right there. You never see math facts or use math facts as a family. So we just take random facts, but we do put what we call reciprocals together. And what we're going to do here is we're going to show them the card. And one time we're going to read it to them, those 5 cards. And then they're going to read it the next time. And then after they've had a couple of sessions of that, and then they listen for a couple of minutes to somebody telling them. So they're taking it in auditorily, visually, all these different ways. And then you have they have an opportunity to do this. So you've gone through it a couple of times, and on the third try, or on the third time through, you hold it up like this with your hand over it. Maybe on Monday, you have to go, oh, remember? On Wednesday, they just say 13, and by Friday, it is solid. So they have done this a couple of times a day, and it takes about a minute for that to happen. And then they listen to a recording that has extra intensity. We have this saying frequency, intensity, and duration. So frequency is how often you see something or hear something or get that information in. Excuse me. And intensity, how strong that information comes in. So if you're just doing something for a minute and you're really, animated with them and you're working with them like that, it's very intense. And then your duration is very short. So those flashes, or maybe you do that at the first of your math lesson and at the end of your math lesson. And then during the day, they do this 2 minutes of listening. Well, as they're going along, and 2 minutes is a short time, but your mind starts to wander along the way. So in the recordings, there's something funny that happens, or somebody will say something unusual that just kind of gets their brain and they go, what was that?
Just kind of brings them back as the brain starts to wander.
Exactly. So you just kind of get into this, I'm listening to these math facts, and what pretty trees there are outside. Mm-hmm. So that funny thing or that intense thing just brings them back, and now they're listening to math facts again. So they do that, And then we have what's called a discovery game. The discovery game is where they listen to the math facts, the same 5 that we're working on all week, and they write the answer that they hear. So instead of saying, okay, now do these, we're still putting it in. But the difference is it's in a different order. So it's not the first one we're calling out. They have to listen carefully and hunt for it. That's more of the intensity.
So with a discovery game, just to be clear, because this is also going to be audio on the podcast, the discovery game is in a book.
Yes.
And so
it's in the student book.
Yeah, so it's in the student book, and it does for the discovery game. Does it have the answers? I can't remember. Does it have the answers? Okay. It doesn't.
The thing different about this is they're writing the answer, but
they're being told what the answer is.
Right.
Okay.
They're being told the problem with the answer. Then they have to
they're
find
seeing it and they're writing it.
Mm-hmm. So what we found, Judy, is that there's this hand-eye.
Oh, yeah.
You know how when you're driving a car, when you first start driving a car, it's just automatic? I mean, it's not automatic.
Right.
You have to think of every little thing. But once you have driven for a while, you just are on autopilot.
Yeah.
So I think there really is something to having to write it down, but we're still given the answer. And so pretty soon when they're doing their math, the operations, the computation that they have to do, it's just automatic. It just kind of like typing, you know, that finger goes on that particular key, and you don't even have to think about it. It just happens. So that's a real important aspect of this too. So they're writing it in the student book. So those are 4 very quick input sessions. It takes about 6 minutes out of your day to do that. You want to separate it out because you don't want again, for the brain to just wander and go, I'm going through the motions. So you just spread those things out, and that's where they get the input. So by the end of the week, they've seen, heard, said, and written those 5 math facts 60 times.
Oh,
correct. Wow. Yes, 60 times. So the thing that you don't want to do is hold up this card and for them to say 12, because that inputs into their brain the answer is 12. Then they have to see it 21 more times to get it right because they've had the bad input.
You know, and what I like is, so with my daughter, I tried every spelling program out there, and the one that I ended up using is all about spelling and it does the same thing. And, you know, they see it, they hear it, they write it, they speak it orally. Is there an oral component to the rapid recall? I don't recall that she has to speak it out.
Well, it's best when you do those input sessions that one time through the cards, she reads them.
Okay.
And then one time through the cards, you read it.
Okay. So, because I actually modified it a little bit because our schedule was crazy. And I found it difficult sometimes to get the 6 times in, especially the part where we had to log on to the computer. So I had to modify a little bit. So I want to talk to you about that. But even in the slightly modified version, making sure that the concept of doing the reading and the writing and the hearing when we were able to access it on the computer, all of that. And then also at one point, I think you have her looking at it with her dominant eye and listening with her dominant ear.
Right. That's part of the storage that I was talking about. And
yes.
We've done a little modification of the program where the audio files that have the intensity are just in a download, so you could have them on your phone or whatever. You don't have to log in to the computer anymore.
That will be very helpful, because that was the one where we really got off the rails with because we weren't able to access it on the computer at the times when we needed to do it. And so that's the one we really ran off the rails. But the other parts, were great. And so since we couldn't do that, I would just kind of try to do it myself if we were out, because we're in the car a lot. We homeschool, so we're in the car a lot. And so the car was a great place to get some of this done. You're in the car. I live in Atlanta, and it takes 40 minutes to get everywhere. So we do a lot of car schooling here. So being able to have the audio files accessible when we're mobile, super helpful. But go ahead. But
I was just going to say one more section of this that is kind of more in the traditional realm. So you've done the 4 different inputs. You've done 2 visual. They've just listened, like you could do that in the car, and then they've listened and written it down as they hear the answer. Then there is a traditional speed drill that's a component of this that helps it be a spiraling review.
Yeah.
But the only time that they do the speed drill is after they've had the 60 exposures of the correct information. So they just zoom through typically and are so excited. I've had first graders that just, the teacher said, never in my 17 years of teaching have I had first graders ask for more math.
Oh, wow.
So that's really exciting too. So that's just a little speed drill that they do anytime on their own, and you just see how they do. Now, some children don't do well with timed tests.
Yeah.
So you just take the timed element out of it.
So, okay. So just to kind of encapsulate your rapid recall system and why it's different. So typically in a traditional setting, just like I did with my son, you've got your flashcards, and actually we did families. And so we had our little families cards, because we started off with Montessori. So Montessori kind of does families. And so start off with the flashcards or with the Montessori beads or whatever. And, he was able to acquire the math facts really quickly in a traditional way. But I'm on Facebook forums all the time, and people are always saying that, their kids are having difficulty. They're struggling acquiring their math facts. I talk to parents out in the wild, and they're always saying, their kids are struggling with the math facts, but everybody's using the traditional way. So yours is different because first off, it's incorporating several senses. Is very similar to the Orton-Gillingham method when I think about engaging all the senses, because that's kind of how I teach my daughter to read and spell, kind of using an Orton-Gillingham kind of approach. That is the best way that she learns, and some kids learn better that way. What have you seen, Jan, have you seen this work really well for kids who are not neurotypical? Are those usually the kids that you work with because their parents are like, this kid is not getting this information? Right. So what are you seeing? Who are your customers? Who are your clients?
Well, really, neurodevelopment is for everybody. But like you said, most people that are seeking this kind of information are having children that struggle. So I use this with my grandchildren. They're very gifted. My 5-year-old grandson knows all his addition facts through this method. So you can use it for gifted, typical, or struggling learners. But one example, I had one lady, we go to homeschool book fairs often to help families. And this lady, she said, I have autistic twins, and they hate math. I mean, they just hate it. And she came back the next year and she said, oh my goodness, I cannot believe this. Math is my children's favorite subject. She said, I used to get a number out and they would just run screaming. They just hated it. And she said, we did this method where, it's all input and there's really nothing for them to do except sit there and take it in. Mm-hmm. And she said in a couple of weeks, they go, oh, we can do this. And so it was really exciting for her. So I've seen some children need a little more a little more input. So sometimes when they're struggling, or they maybe have a lower IQ, or they're just really have a number of things going wrong with their ability to get information out, they have to sometimes go more than a week on a particular track. We call it a track. So 5 problems at a time, and is on one track. And so that you can go longer on a track. And like you said, you can add that neurodevelopmental aspect of, if they're right-handed and you're sure they're right-handed, you put the earbud just in their right ear. So the information's going and being stored in the language center, because this side of the body is controlled by this side of the brain. So it goes there so it can be accessed when you go to write it down. And then you can also have them be a pirate while they're doing that. And they would, what we call occlude or cover the opposite eye. So you want to make sure, not to get this confused. If they're right-handed, you want them to see with their right eye and hear with their right ear. And that just makes it go better into the story.
Okay, so I know that I've talked to you, and we'll talk more when we're talking about the executive functioning in the executive functioning episode, but can you share with us how you got into this line of work, where you started doing research about just neurodevelopmental stuff?
Well, I had a huge need in my own life. My daughter had a low IQ, and she was really struggling with reading, with math. She struggled with everything, really. And so I had homeschooled her. I had put her, well, we started with public school. We didn't stay there long. I put her in private school, and it was a Montessori, where she could be with her peers, but on her own level. That was a really good experience. And then because of the crash in 08, we moved to Dallas, and I didn't have those options anymore. So God showed me homeschooling back before it was, that was not in 08. It was the one before that. Sorry. So she needed some individual help, but I didn't know for sure. I didn't know anything about homeschooling, even though I was a certified teacher. And God showed me, opened the door for that, and we did that for 5 years with more of a traditional approach. And I was just about to give up. She was 15. She was reading on and doing math about the first grade level, and I didn't know what else to do. I had done all the tricks that they had taught me when I was in college. And so, sometimes when you get to just the end of your abilities in yourself, and God just comes in and shows you new things. So he showed me the neurodevelopmental approach. It changed her life. And I just started volunteering for the organization right away. And I would see dyslexic children, and they would just be making huge gains, a year in reading in just 4 months, that kind of thing. That just seemed very unusual to me, because usually they struggle and are behind. But the kids with ADD were catching up and making great strides. So I just said, I have to be part of this. And so I was trained as a neurodevelopmentalist, and then over the years have found new things to incorporate. And of course, there's so much more technology now. Before, we were just going by faith that the brain was changing, because back then they thought it was pretty static by 12, and it went downhill from there.
Right.
But we found it different. The brain has a lot of what we call plasticity, and it can change as long as you are stimulating the brain. So that's kind of how I got into this, and developed these things along the way. Some of our my company that we started with is called Little Giant Steps, and we're expanding now to what's called brain sprints. We're expanding our services to brain sprints, and Little Giant Steps will still be there because that's the one that has the products. That's the one we developed the products under. So you can actually, if you're interested in whether your child needs to really work on their math facts, we have what's called a free math facts assessment. So on Little Giant Steps, it's one of the buttons on the home page, and it will be on the list. If you scroll down on the new side, it's not up yet for brain sprints. In the next couple of weeks, it will be, Lord willing. And on the, there's a yellow navigation about halfway down the homepage, and you'll see math, and you can get a free math facts assessment. So you take this kind of like a speed drill, and then you determine whether your child is kind of on grade level based on how many they can do correct in 1 minute. So it's got all the instructions there and all the tests that you would use, and what you're looking for as far as if your child's in 6th grade, how many they should be able to do. And then you can determine, do they need to work on their addition facts? Some people ask me, they're in multiplication, they're in 3rd, 4th grade, and they say, well, should I work on multiplication? And my view is, let's start at the beginning if they need. Because, as you know, with multiplication, if you get into 2 digits, you've got to be adding.
Yes.
So it's better to go back and really solidify those things.
Yeah.
If you did all of the operations in rapid recall, then it would take about a year to do it. So if you have an older child, you could go through it all in a year. But for a younger child, you could go slower. It's about 12 to 14 weeks for a beginner.
A younger child or a child that struggles, because I couldn't get through it that quickly with my daughter, and she's 10 now. But so yeah, but you get through it at your own pace. Now, one of the things, and I'll make sure that I have the links to Jan's website at the bottom of this podcast episode, or wherever you're seeing or hearing this. I'll make sure that I have the link to Little Giant Steps. And then whenever you get the new link, Jan, will there be a link on the Little Giant Steps page to the new page?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll make sure that we've got the link there. And I have recommended numerous people visit your website, because at conventions and when I'm just meeting people around, because I really saw it, truly meeting you and talking to you at the convention totally changed my view. It just took me in a different direction with regard to working with my daughter. And it really helped me to just be more patient, to be more calm, and just truly understand what it is she needed. And for that, I'm grateful.
Yes, bringing hope is something that I really love doing, and bringing, like you say, bring the tension down by helping people understand why something may be happening with their child. It's not just they're little sadistic beings trying information from us. They're really having some struggles.
Yes. So, all right. So for the math facts, and Jan, I'd just like to get your opinion, because I know that now in a lot of public schools, they are de-emphasizing the need to acquire math facts by rote memory. I'm old school. My husband's old school. We still believe that these skills are necessary. And so I'm sure you've seen this. So I'd just like you to talk about whether, what you think as far as acquiring math facts by rote memorization.
All right. Well, my opinion is that it is the cornerstone of math. I mean, just think how long it's going to take a child to do their math homework when they don't know their math facts. It's just going to be drudgery. They're going to hate math. It's just, they're forming bad habits by counting their fingers.
Oh gosh.
Or, counting in their head or whatever. Now, you want to keep them away from their fingers. And when they have to do a math fact, I would use tally marks or circles. Circles are better because you say, well, as soon as you know your math fact, you don't have to use circles anymore. So, yeah, it gets them motivated. But just think about it. If you don't have the basic skills of just seeing something at the grocery store and being able to do math in your head, it's going to be a deficit for you. I don't know where there's the idea that this is not important. It's bizarre to me.
Yeah, I think it is. And, with regard, and this is going a little off of track with the rapid recall system, but one of the things that, they do in school now is they have what they call the new math. And parents are struggling, kids are struggling because they're showing different ways of completing a problem. Back in the old days, we had the standard algorithm, and that's what you did. I found that with my son, I can show him the 50 different ways to approach a problem, and then he can decide which one he likes the best. It's always a standard algorithm, by the way. He can decide which way he likes doing it the best, and then he can do whatever, he can do his problems however. But with my daughter, I cannot show her 50 different ways of doing things. And that's something I've learned, and that's something that really I took away from you, that, her mind is different. And so she gets terribly confused if I try to show her the kind of the new math way or the 3 or 4 different ways to approach it. So I've just kind of chucked it whenever we're working on math, and we just go straight to the standard algorithm. This is what scientists have been using for ages. And so that's kind of what I get to. And I know it's been a long time since you were teaching, but do you have any thoughts about the kind of the new ways of doing math and how that might impact, especially a child that's struggling?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, why mess with something that has been working for centuries? It's just easy. It's more direct. In fact, we have something I've developed just recently. I think it's been since we met that I've finished this. It's called Visual Circle Math. Mm-hmm. And in there, it's not a whole math curriculum. It doesn't have all the measurements and all of that kind of thing. But if your child either is gifted, like my granddaughter is way ahead in math because of this particular system, it's actually showing them what math is, what math computation is. So it's got a specific script and some practice pages that you use, and then a spiraling kind of review where our philosophy is make sure they are seeing what they've had before at least once a day, not 15 problems, but 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. And then they continue to have that basic knowledge, foundational, and then they move to the next step. So it's a way to catch children up that are behind, because that's who I work with, of course, mm-hmm. but it works with the gifted children too that don't need a whole year of curriculum to master that particular step of understanding. So you can, they review all those other things, the clocks and the measurement and all the other aspects of math every year in their books. And so sometimes they can just skip a whole grade if they don't need to go through all of that. It gets redundant. Yep. And they're ready for something new, the kids that are more typical and gifted. So it's a way that you could use it either way. But I just think that it's just confusing, and I think it causes conflict in the family because the parents go, let's do it like this. It's simple. Yes. And they go, oh, no, our teacher says to do it like that. And so it kind of separates the family too. I don't like that aspect.
The thing that you just mentioned, I was just thinking when you were talking about the new system that you have. It sounds like it would be perfect for people who have pulled their kids out of public school, who may be behind or may have some gaps. It sounds like it would be perfect for those families, because I do talk to a lot of people who are pulling their kids out of school and they know there are gaps, they're behind. And that sounds like a perfect instrument to use to kind of backfill the gaps. They can move ahead in what they can, but then we're backfilling gaps, because that's a huge one. When people are pulling their kids, when they're yanking their kids, I woke up today, the last straw happened, I'm yanking my kid out today. These are the people who are saying, I have no idea, there are gaps, there are holes, I don't know where to start. But that sounds like something that would be perfect for them.
Right, because the tendency is to go, there are gaps, I just have to go back a couple of grades and do all this curriculum, which is really not necessary to do every problem on every page and every curriculum. There's not a perfect curriculum for anything. So you just judge. With our system, you introduce a new concept like multiplication with like 2 digits times 1 digit, for example. You introduce that, and then on the practice pages that week, you're reviewing everything that you've had before, one addition, one subtraction, one, carry, borrow, all of those kinds of things, and just lower level multiplication. But then you're spending most of your time on that new concept. And then you stay on that as long as you need to. We've got pages that will be equal to a week of help for that. But if you see that your child needs more, then you just make pages that look like that with different problems on it. So it works really well to get them caught up quickly.
And to not to overdo in the areas where they don't need it. Right. Because you like you said, you typically don't need to go back and do an entire school year's worth of stuff. They're just fractions is it's one of those things. It's like every year, one of my children sees it for the first time. And it's amazing to me that every single year it's brand new.
Exactly. And that's the point of this review, is because if they, in most curriculums, fractions is just a couple of weeks and then they drop it.
Yeah.
And next year they bring it back for a couple of weeks and then they drop it. No wonder they can't remember that the denominator has to be the same to add. So,
but and even my son, who's a gifted math person, once we hit pre-algebra, even though he'd zoomed through math, he was one who I wouldn't have him do all the problems. I'd just have him do like the 4 or 5 hardest, and if he could get them, we'd move on. But once we hit pre-algebra, fractions, I literally had to stop pre-algebra and I got like a Life of Fred fractions book or something, and because he had to do the whole book to even begin to start doing the pre-algebra. And I was really surprised because he'd never had trouble doing fractions before, but it was fractions. But then my other one, like I said, it's like every year it's like, oh wow, what's this, fractions? So yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry. It amazes me, but anyway, so yeah, that sounds like that's something really good for people who are looking to fill gaps or trying to see where their kid is lacking. Let's see. I think that we have covered. Now, is there anything else? Oh yes, one more thing. Busy mom, homeschooling, 5 kids, I've got, and I actually have a friend who, and I did a podcast with her a couple weeks ago. She's got, I think her oldest, this year her kids are 4, 6, 8, and 10. And she doesn't have a whole lot of time. So when she's looking at this rapid recall system, she may say, you know what, this sounds great, but it's going to take a bunch of my time. I've got a whole lot of stuff going on. So speak to mom who's super busy, maybe even a little bit overwhelmed with all the other stuff she's trying to get done anyway. She's got, multiple kids, different ages, different levels. Speak to that mom about the time commitment and how doable this is.
Okay. So you're going to, my suggestion is to do the 1 minute of flash just before you do a math lesson with them, and then 1 minute of flash right after that. And if you don't have that second time, do it one time with them, and then have the children be teachers for each other. So there's nothing, output with this. So a 5-year-old can hold up for a 10-year-old the math fact, and they both see it and hear it. And so the 5-year-old can be the teacher, which they'd like to be, and or the 10-year-old can do it for the other child. Then the listen, you can have it on a little like iPad, or it can be on a tablet, it can be on a phone, it can be on an MP3 player, and you just say, go listen. And that's on their checklist. And then the listen and write, which is the discovery game, they do that independently too. And the speed drill is independent. So really, 1 minute of intense work with your child, and then delegating the rest on their own check sheet works great. Now with the little one, like with the 5-year-old, if you don't have an older child to work with them on that 1 minute of flash, then you want to make sure you get that in, because you're going to be working with them on math anyway. So just at the first of the math lesson and at the end, voila, it's done.
Okay, awesome. So we're not talking about a whole lot of time,
right?
At it because it, you homeschooled. It can feel overwhelming sometimes, especially when you are working with a child or multiple children who might be struggling. And so I like the idea of doing it together. And it doesn't, especially with the listening and, like you said, it's input. So I like that idea that you can actually work with multiple children, multiple ages at the same time. Okay.
Yes, you can do the flash with 2 or 3 children if they're on the same particular track that they're working on. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, because I actually let my son do it a little bit, and so he was always, moving a little faster than my daughter. So yeah, I think that, and then I can say that the system does work, and really, when you read some of Dr. Bedell's literature, it kind of opens you up. And I've talked to so many people recently who have said that they are, in fact, I just talked to somebody this past weekend. She's taken her child from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor to try to get help, try to get a diagnosis. And she was saying that, and I know how you are about labels, and we're going to talk about labels in the in the neuro developmental episode. So you guys make sure you listen to that one. But she's, it's like she said that she's gone to multiple doctors and she wants a diagnosis, but then, and she's not getting one. She's like, clearly my child is different, but the consensus is nothing's wrong. But then she said, she's been thinking, why do we even want a diagnosis? How is it helpful? And so she's kind of come to that conclusion. How is it helpful? And I said, well, I know a lot of people who are wanting diagnoses, and I think it's because then they feel like they could then get services to fix, or services or programs to fix whatever that diagnosis is. But I know that a lot of, and I can't wait to cover the other one with you, because I know you have very strong opinions about the labels, and I tend to agree with them. But yeah, so she's like, why do we even seek these labels to begin with? But I think that when as you have done, Jan, you have found this way to kind of work with their little brains. And your approach is, we're just going to work with what we've got. We're not going to do labels. That's kind of a teaser. We're not going to do labels. We're just going to work with their little brains because they are still plastic and there is still plasticity there. And we can still, chart new pathways and things like that. And I really love that approach. So, and I'm going to throw some words out there. I don't know exactly what they all mean. You will. But I hear people say their kids have dyscalculia. That's the writing thing? Or is that specifically math or is that writing? Math. Okay.
Dysgraphia is the writing.
Okay, good. That makes sense. Graph is writing, calc. Okay. So for people whose kids are struggling with those labels or even parents with autistic children who have that, who are on the spectrum, which is kind of, it's a spectrum and perhaps even a catch-all. I don't know. Will this system work?
Yes, the system will work because it's an input system. And just to let you know that I do have a podcast and a YouTube. I have a YouTube channel called Brain Coach Tips if you want to know more about neurodevelopment. And there's one specific on there that is to label or not to label. So I give reasons why you would label a child and why I encourage not to have labels, because what we're talking about is symptoms. So if they have a certain number of symptoms, then they call on that particular label. And what we found is that there's glitches in the brain in those areas that if you treat the root cause, those symptoms tend to diminish and oftentimes go away. That's the good news. I mean, we can't always fix every situation, but we can make it better. And I just want to go back to that point that you made about time for math facts. Mm-hmm. So let's put it this way. If you take a minute here, a minute there, and they take 2 minutes there and 2 minutes there to do the rapid recall system, and they can get their math done in half the time, or can do it without errors that you have to check and circle and say, go back and do some more. And then you have to deal with their attitude. What is the drawback there? Just spending 6 minutes on making them successful instead of dealing with all of that. That's the trade-off that I see.
And it's perfect because the last thing that you want to hear is your child tell you they're not good in math. And I've heard that. I've heard my daughter say that a few times. She doesn't really say it anymore, but it always, because she could learn a standard algorithm pretty well, which was surprising. She could do the formulas pretty well, but the thing that was taking her an hour to do 10 problems, it wasn't because she didn't know the standard algorithm. It's because she didn't know her math facts. And so When you hear kids say they're not good at math, I always say, do they know their math facts by rote? And if they don't, I often think that that's actually the root problem of it.
Yeah. And then, all the corrections and all of that yes. takes your time. So.
And the attitude, I love that.
Yeah.
All right.
I point too that they just get this idea in their head that they're not good at math.
Yes.
And so that's half the battle too.
Yes, and that's so really the worst.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think that that's going to wrap up Rapid Recall. Thank you so much, Jan. Do you have anything else, any last words about the Rapid Recall system? And we're going to make sure that we have all of your contact information, all your links that we've discussed in the show notes. You just send them to me. And but is there one last thing you want to tell us about Rapid Recall that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, I guess the main thing is it's so different that sometimes you go, how can that even be? And then some people say, it just makes sense that you would input instead of asking for output. So that's really it. It works really well. And the kids love it because they're not put on the spot. And then you've got that out of the way so you can tackle more challenging things in math.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jan, and we'll be talking to you soon about your neurodevelopmental stuff.
All right, that's good.
Hey, one more thing before you go. As a valued member of How to Homeschool Radio, I want to help you and hear from you not only when you're listening to the show, but all day, every day. I have a new Facebook group called How to Homeschool, and it's a place where you can get together with other homeschooling families to get support, offer support, and interact real-time to homeschooling issues that are most important to you. If you want to be a part of this growing community, see the latest videos and get live answers to your homeschooling questions, go to judysardin.com/homeschool podcast. Or you can just hop onto Facebook and search for How to Homeschool under groups. Drop me a note to let me know when you join. I can't wait to see you there.